How to plaster your four-legged animal sculpture. The supplies you're going to get is a table cover. You're going to work on this because the plaster is very messy and it takes forever to clean up those black tables. So table cover is one thing. You're going to have a shallow cup, so one of the shorter cups, about half full of hot water. When the water is no longer hot, you're going to dump it out and get fresh hot water. It is going to be better for the plaster. You're going to get a strip of plaster. You're going to get one at a time. And whenever you finish up with the first one, you can go back for a second if you have time. And you'll keep on getting more strips of plaster until the project is finished. And then the one thing that you're going to share is the plaster scissors. They are in the dirty scissor, the plaster scissor drawer. They stay covered in this white plaster dust all the time because I don't want to wash them all off. So plaster scissors, that is the one thing you have to share. So I have my cup of hot water. I'm going to get it kind of out of the way here, my project. And I'm going to start by cutting the plaster into strips. Cut it into strips about 1/2 inch wide. Up to maybe 3/4 of an inch. This is kind of the small end. This is the large end of how I want you guys to cut this plaster. And I'm going to show what's going to happen if you cut your strip too thin. So this is my what not to do, too thin of a strip. You can also take some of the strips. This is okay, this is what to do. You can take some of your strips and cut them into half size. So notice I was not cutting long across here. I'm cutting across the end here. And then I'm going to take my plaster and put it all in a pile away from me. I do not want the plaster all right here because as the water drips onto the plaster, it's going to start to harden, and you don't want it to harden until you're ready for it. So my project. I'm going to start at the back end of the project. If you have a tail made of foil, you'll start there. If you just have the kind of rear end, you'll start there. But we're going to work our way from the back to the front, and not just across the back. You're going to work around and under your project. So to make the plaster work, you're going to take a strip of plaster and you're going to dip it in the hot water. You'll dip it in the hot water for a second, and then you're going to pull it out, and I'm going to turn the plaster dust into goo. You can see I just run my thumb across it like this, and it goes from being that all kind of holy, and that when you turn the plaster dust into goo, it kind of fills up some of those holes. And I'm going to lay my first strip down on my project. So I'm going to start here with my tail, and I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to smooth it out and over and around my project. I lay one strip at a time, and then I take my fingers and I go back and smooth it all out. Now I'll go for a second strip. So dunk it in the water, turn it into goo by running my fingers. So this is half goo, half still, where you can see that kind of grid-like pattern. And I'm going to choose a new spot to lay. It's going to half overlap, but then also go into a new spot here. Wrapped around that tail, smooth it out flat to the project. So keep going. This tail is all the way plastered now. I'm going to take my fingers and smooth it out. I should not see any grid lines. What you're not going to do is just dunk it in the water, put it on your project. It should not look like this. You should not see all those little holes. It should start to turn into this white, almost clay-looking goo. I don't know what the word of it is. So smooth out all those holes, lay it down, take my fingers, and spread that plaster goo around. Every piece is going to partly overlap a piece that's already on there and cover some new area. So now I have some smaller pieces that I had cut. Smaller pieces are good for around legs. So I'm getting close to a leg here. I'm going to take one of these little pieces and I'm going to place it here right next to the metal leg. And I'm going to take another piece And I'm going to come on the other side of the metal leg. And I'll take a third and do the same thing. So now I've supported the leg from 1, 2, 3 different angles, and when this hardens, it's going to lock that leg into place. You should not see any shadowy holes. It's going to come up really close and tight around that metal and dry into place. Now here's that strip that's kind of that what not to do strip. When you put it in the water, if you go through and you smooth it all out, you end up having this string that practically disintegrates, and it's really hard to lay onto your project. So I like to not cut them too small, because what can you do with this? I have no idea. When you're out of your first strip of plaster, if there's still time in class, you will go back for a new strip. Maybe dry your hands before you start cutting, because you don't want it to get wet, but I'll get a new strip of plaster and cut again. Make sure not getting my plaster pieces into any water. Cut on a dry part of your table cover. Set those pieces out to the side and pick up where you left off. So notice I've gotten all the way back here almost to the hips. I'm not going to just set him up and place it all across his back and neck and head. I'm working around and under, so every piece of plaster I place, it is going to touch another piece of plaster. I'm not just going to jump up somewhere else. It's going to touch something I've already placed down and cover a new area. I have to work here onto the belly. Can't ignore that. Just as important as the back, everything has to get painted. After every couple pieces, go through and just smooth everything out. Make it nice and flat. I don't want to see any tape still. You shouldn't see any foil still. So I've now gotten up to almost the shoulders, and all the back end of this is completely finished. So as I would continue from where I left off, but I'm actually going to skip up to the metal parts of his ears for some demonstration purposes. So I have a couple pieces left. I'm going to cut them here into kind of half-size pieces to show the ears. I'm kind of prop them up here so you guys can see it. Normally, you would have to come all the way up to the head before you could start on something like the ears, but like I said, for the video, I'm going to show you guys this way. Now, I have a type of ear that I could move it out of the way and put it back down, or else you're going to have to feed it through the middle of the ear and flatten it out to his head. So I'll take another one around the outside here, smooth it down to his head, and another one around the top of his head, getting nice around the head, so when this dries, it's going to hold that metal into place. It's not going to let it keep moving around. And I have one more piece, and then I'm out of more plaster, and I'll go back and get more. So now all that plaster is locked in around the ear, nice and smooth, and when it dries, it's going to hold that ear into place. Okay, another thing to tell you about the scissors is if you are cutting plaster and it is not making a clean cut, you need to try a different pair of scissors. If it is tearing the plaster, if all this plaster dust is landing on your table, then you need to try a different pair. Those don't work well for you. Some of them just don't work as well as others, and I only have so many pairs, so I keep them all, because sometimes people can work with them. Also, if it's not cutting, a lot of times it's because your hands were wet. My fingers were wet where I touched right there, and now I have a hard time cutting. Let the plaster stay really dry. Dry your hands whenever you get a new piece so that you do not ruin your plaster too soon. But I'm going to keep on going around my fox. Remember, as your water cools off, you're going to want to dump it and get fresh hot water. The plaster melts into this goo better if your water is warm. So this is completely plastered. I'm going to wipe the plaster off of the legs here. I can either do it now or when it's dry. I'll scrape that off. And there's no more foil, no more tape. Smooth to my project. What I started with back here is already hard enough that I can't get it wet. I can't reactivate that plaster. Once it's down and it's hardening, it's finished. You can't reactivate it with more water. So I can go back, kind of smooth things out. Shouldn't be any shadowy holes around where the metal pops out. It's going to hold those wires into place. Whatever plaster I have left over at the end of the class period or the end of the project, take those strips if they're completely dry and return them back to the table so that somebody else can use those pieces. But otherwise, this is finished and ready to be painted. Now, I'm not going to plaster this whole one, but if you were to have something with spikes or a mane, details like whiskers and things, you're going to have to be extra careful. For instance, with this mane, what I'm actually going to do is very carefully, I'm going to kind of pull it away from the body. I would then plaster, starting at the tail, all around, plaster around the tail, wrapping it underneath here, and then after the project was over, I'd go back and put the mane back into place, or the spikes. But I would plaster the whole wire and tape body, get really good around the wings, through the wings, up the shoulders, neck, be really good around where the spikes come out of the body here on both sides, and then get kind of smaller pieces, get in good around the the whiskers from different angles, so that when they dry, these stop kind of moving around. The dried plaster is going to hold those things into place. So if you have more extensions, more curves and things, you're going to have a little bit more work to do when you're plastering. So enjoy.